He signed over every asset 2 hours before the monitor flatlined, my stepmother said softly, sliding the heavy blue envelope across the polished glass table in the hospital waiting room while my father's body was still warm in room 412. The logistics company, the commercial real estate holdings, the offshore accounts, all of it transferred directly into my living trust. I know this is a shock to you, Clara, but your father wanted to ensure the business remained in capable, steady hands rather than being fragmented by probate. I looked down at the crisp parchment pages stamped with an unfamiliar notary seal from a township 3 hours away. My hands trembled as I read the forged signature at the bottom, a jagged, clumsy attempt at my father's distinct, fluid handwriting. On the 3rd page, a clause explicitly stripped me of my position as Chief Operating Officer and barred me from setting foot on any company property effective immediately. Before I could even process the ink on the page, 2 uniformed private security guards stepped out from behind the velvet curtains of the private family lounge and positioned themselves on either side of my chair. I have already instructed the system administrators to revoke your administrative credentials and remote access token, Helena continued, her voice entirely devoid of grief as she adjusted the diamond band on her left finger. Your personal belongings from the executive suite have been packed into 2 cardboard boxes and placed in the trunk of your car in the subterranean garage. If you attempt to access the headquarters, the warehouse network, or contact any board members, these officers will have you arrested for trespassing and corporate espionage. My phone vibrated violently in my coat pocket. It was an automated alert from the central banking portal, indicating that my personal line of credit, which was tied to the corporate treasury account, had just been terminated due to suspicious activity. I looked up into Helena's cold, calculating eyes and realized that this was not a sudden decision made in the fog of my father's final hours. This was a meticulously planned execution that had been quietly set into motion weeks before his sudden collapse. Standing up slowly, I felt the icy chill of absolute isolation wash over me as the security guards flanked my every step toward the glass elevators. But as the door slid shut, sealing me out of my father's legacy, my thumb brushed against a small metal key tucked deep inside my inner jacket lining, a physical redundancy key my father had secretly given me 6 months ago, with a strict warning never to mention its existence to anyone. I walked out to the freezing rain of the hospital parking lot, with my heart hammering against my ribs, the weight of the silver key in my pocket feeling heavier than the 2 cardboard boxes sitting in my trunk. Driving back to my quiet townhouse on the outskirts of Chicago, I kept looking in my rearview mirror, half expecting Helena to have hired someone to follow me. Everything I had built over the last decade had been wiped away in a single afternoon. My father, Richard Vance, had founded Vance Logistics 35 years ago with a single flatbed truck and an unshakable belief in hard work. When my mother passed away during my sophomore year of college, the company became our shared life raft. I gave up my dreams of attending an Ivy League business school, transferred to a local university, and spent my mornings learning the supply chain algorithms while my afternoons were spent working the loading docks alongside the veteran mechanics. Father taught me that a true leader knows every bolt, every line of code, and every worker by name. By the time I turned 30, he officially named me Chief Operating Officer, and together we expanded the company from a regional courier service into a multi-million-dollar logistics powerhouse with distribution centers across 4 states. Then came Helena. She entered our lives 3 years ago as a senior financial consultant, hired to oversee our corporate tax restructuring. She was polished, articulate, and possessed an uncanny ability to make my father feel like he was the brilliant patriarch he always dreamed of being. Within 8 months, they were married in a private ceremony on a yacht in Miami. I tried my best to accept her, pushing aside the small, nagging voices in my head whenever I noticed her scrutinizing our quarterly earnings reports or asking detailed questions about the legal ownership structure of our real estate subsidiaries. Looking back, the warning signs were subtle at first. About 6 months ago, my father began forgetting simple appointments and complaining of sudden blinding headaches that left him completely disoriented for hours. Helena was always right beside him, offering him specialized vitamins and proprietary herbal supplements she claimed were imported from an exclusive clinic in Switzerland. She insisted on managing his daily medication schedule personally, steering him away from our family doctor of 20 years and hiring a private concierge physician who reported directly to her. Around that same time, subtle friction began to creak through the executive office. Helena started attending high-level executive strategy meetings, questioning my operational decisions and quietly replacing key long-term managers with her own external hires. Whenever I tried to pull my father aside to express my growing concerns about the sudden budget reallocations she was authorizing, he would wave his hand tiredly, his eyes cloudy and unfocused, telling me that Helena was merely taking the administrative burden off his shoulders so he could focus on his health. 2 months ago, my father called me into his home office late on a Sunday evening when Helena was out attending a charity gala in downtown Chicago. He looked noticeably thinner, his hands trembling slightly as he handed me the small silver key that was currently resting in my coat pocket. He told me that if anything ever happened to him, I needed to check the old mechanical vault located inside the original decommissioned warehouse in Cicero, the very first building he bought when he started the firm. He looked terrified, repeatedly looking over his shoulder toward the hallway, as if he feared the walls themselves were listening. Before I could push him for details, the garage door opened, signaling Helena's return, and he quickly changed the subject to mundane scheduling matters. Now, sitting in my dark living room with the rain pouring down against the window panes, the reality of my situation pressed down on me like an anvil. My father had passed away from what the hospital preliminarily labeled a massive stroke, but the timeline made 0 sense. He had been admitted to the intensive care unit on Friday night, yet the legal documents Helena presented claimed he had signed over his entire estate on Saturday morning while fully coherent. The next morning, I drove to our bank to access my personal savings, only to be told by a visibly uncomfortable bank officer that my primary account had been frozen due to an ongoing internal audit initiated by Vance Logistics. Helena was attempting to starve me out financially, severing every lifeline I had before I could even consult a lawyer. She knew that high-stakes corporate litigation required immense capital, and she was actively cutting off my access to the resources needed to fight back. Driven by pure desperation, I waited until twilight fell before driving out to the industrial district of Cicero. The old warehouse stood like a dark monolith against the gray sky, surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. The property had been unused for operational storage for over 5 years, serving only as an overflow facility for obsolete equipment. As I pulled my car behind an overgrown row of bushes near the side entrance, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. Parked near the main loading bay was an unmarked black van with dark tinted windows, its engine idling silently in the shadows. 2 men in dark uniforms were busy moving heavy metal filing cabinets out of the warehouse's administrative annex and loading them into the back of the vehicle. Helena was not just taking over the company. She was systematically erasing something from the past. I crouched behind the thick concrete barrier near the abandoned rail spur, watching the two men haul another steel cabinet toward the back of the unmarked van. Rain dripped from the brim of my hood, slipping down my collar as I tried to control my ragged breathing. They were clearing out my father's original office, the small wood-paneled room where he had kept 30 years of paper records, old ledger books, and personal correspondence. Helena was leaving nothing to chance, systematically stripping the property clean before any court-ordered injunction could be filed to freeze the physical assets. I waited 40 minutes until the van's brake lights flashed, its tires kicking up gravel as it sped away into the gloom. Once the sound of the engine faded into the distance, I stepped over the collapsed fence line and navigated the familiar dark corridor toward the rear storage bays. The scent of motor oil, damp cardboard, and oxidized iron hung heavy in the air, a familiar mixture that instantly reminded me of working late nights with my father when I was learning the ropes of the freight business. Reaching the far corner of the warehouse behind a stack of wooden pallets, I found the rusted metal door leading to the old mechanical vault. My hands shook as I inserted the silver key into the primary lock cylinder. It turned with a heavy, satisfying click, but the door refused to budge. A second lock, a digital keyless entry pad that had been retrofitted 3 years ago, glowed red in the darkness. I stared at the keyless panel, realizing my father had left me no code, no instructions, and no manual sequence. I leaned my forehead against the cool steel door, frustration threatening to overwhelm me. Then I remembered something my father used to say whenever a complex piece of heavy machinery malfunctioned on the shop floor. He always said that the simplest pattern is usually the one everyone overlooks because they are looking for something brilliant. I reached out and entered his original employee identification number, the 5-digit code he held when he drove his first delivery truck in 1991. The panel beeped twice, and the indicator light flipped from deep red to solid green. The heavy door swung open on oiled hinges, revealing a small windowless room, untouched by the workers who had looted the upper floor. Sitting on a small metal table in the center of the vault was a thick, leather-bound binder and a high-grade external hard drive attached to a standalone air-gapped laptop. I opened the laptop, which powered on immediately without requiring a network connection. On the desktop was a single directory containing encrypted PDF files, categorized by month and year. Beside the laptop lay a handwritten ledger containing hundreds of entries in my father's neat, precise script. As I flipped through the pages of the physical ledger, the true nature of what Helena had been doing for the past 2 years began to unravel before my eyes. She had not been quietly managing corporate taxes as she claimed to the board of directors. Instead, she had been systematically siphoning funds from our core operating accounts through a complex network of shell companies registered in Delaware and the Cayman Islands. But the most horrifying discovery was not the theft of company revenue. It was a folder labeled with my father's personal medical records, including private toxicology reports he had commissioned independently through an out-of-state laboratory just 3 weeks before his collapse. The lab results indicated elevated levels of heavy metals and synthetic sedatives in his blood work, substances that were completely absent from the standard panel run by the hospital concierge doctor Helena had hired. My father knew he was being poisoned. He had been quietly documenting his failing physical condition, tracking every dose of the imported supplements Helena gave him, and backing up the internal server logs that showed her unauthorized access to his digital signature key. I plugged my flash drive into the laptop and began transferring every file, every transaction record, and the full medical analysis onto my drive. Just as the transfer bar reached 90%, the faint sound of footsteps echoed from the main warehouse bay above. Someone else had just walked through the side door. I ducked behind the heavy steel vault door, holding my breath as the beam of a flashlight cut through the darkness of the corridor outside. Soft, deliberate footsteps echoed against the concrete floor, stopping just short of the vault entrance. My heart hammered against my ribs, each second stretching into an eternity, while the laptop screen behind me glowed faintly. The progress bar inching closer to the finish line. "I know you are in here, Clara." Helena's voice drifted into the cold room, calm, mocking, and chillingly confident. "You always were predictable, just like your father, clinging to old rusted buildings and sentimental trash as if they could save you." She stepped into the doorway dressed in an immaculate dark trench coat, holding a thin silver tablet in one hand. Behind her stood two muscular men in plain dark suits, the same security detail that had escorted me out of the hospital waiting room. Helena glanced at the open safe, her eyes narrowing as she spotted the glowing laptop screen. "You really thought Richard left you a treasure map, didn't you?" She gave a soft, bitter laugh, taking a step closer. "Your father was weak, Clara. He spent 30 years building an empire, but he lacked the vision to exploit its true value. He was content with honest margins, while I saw a machine capable of generating limitless capital. He trusted you," I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins as I slipped my hand into my coat pocket, my fingers wrapping around my phone. "He opened his home to you, and you poisoned him day by day with those imported supplements." Helena did not flinch or deny it. Instead, a cold, dismissive smile spread across her face. "A medical board will never accept wild allegations from an ousted, vengeful daughter. His death was officially ruled a consequence of severe cardiovascular disease. The hospital signed off, the coroner filed the paperwork, and the body has already been transferred to the private facility for cremation. By tomorrow morning, there won't be a single cell left to test." The laptop gave a soft chime, indicating the transfer was complete. Helena's eyes flicked to the screen, and her smile faded into a sharp, predatory look. She motioned to the two guards behind her. "Take the drive and the laptop," she ordered coldly. "And make sure Clara understands that any further interference with my operations will result in criminal charges for corporate espionage and breaking and entering. Delete everything on that flash drive, inspect her pockets, and throw her out." The two men stepped forward, but before they could lay a hand on me, a loud, piercing alarm sounded throughout the entire warehouse complex. Red strobe lights flashed against the high steel girders overhead, and the automated fire suppression system engaged, pouring a thick curtain of fine water mist from the ceiling pipes. Helena gasped, stepping back as water drenched her coat. Taking advantage of the sudden chaos and blinding spray, I reached behind the laptop, snatched the external hard drive and my flash drive, and shoved the heavy steel vault door forward with all my weight. It slammed shut against the outer frame with a heavy mechanical latch, locking the security guards inside the vault room for crucial seconds. I sprinted down the narrow rear passage toward the old emergency exit, bursting out into the freezing rain. The alarm was not a random glitch. Before entering the vault, I had set a timed override signal on the warehouse security panel using my father's old administrative bypass code, knowing that if I did not clear the panel within 20 minutes, the emergency protocols would trigger automatically. I threw myself into my car, revved the engine, and sped away into the night just as Helena emerged from the side entrance, soaked and furious, shouting into her phone. If you are enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to Betrayed, the Revenge channel. A simple like helps more people discover these stories, and your support inspires us to create new ones. Now, let's continue. I drove straight to a small, secure hotel on the outskirts of the city, paying cash for a room under an assumed name. I needed time to analyze every piece of data on the drive. Sitting at the small desk under the dim lamp, I opened the encrypted financial logs my father had saved. What I found went far beyond simple embezzlement. Helena was not just stealing money to fund a lavish lifestyle. She was using Vance Logistics to launder millions of dollars through offshore shell companies, funneling the funds directly into high-risk cryptocurrency transactions. But the crucial piece of evidence came from a hidden subfolder labeled with an encrypted hash key. Inside was a detailed transaction record showing that 4 days before my father's collapse, Helena had executed an unauthorized transfer of $250,000 from our main corporate reserve account directly into a fraudulent crypto investment portal operated by an offshore scam network. She had fallen victim to a high-stakes financial scam herself, losing a massive chunk of liquidity that belonged to our primary shipping partners. To cover up the devastating loss before the annual board audit, she needed total control of the company to liquidate our physical real estate and plug the $250,000 hole in the balance sheet. That was why she had rushed the fake power of attorney, why she had accelerated my father's lethal medication schedule, and why she was desperate to sell off our warehouses at fire sale prices. The fake signature on the new will was only the tip of the iceberg. I now had the complete paper trail of her financial crimes, the raw lab results proving toxic poisoning, and the exact cryptographic proof of her stolen $250,000. She thought she had stripped me of everything, but she had actually handed me the exact weapon I needed to destroy her. The morning of the emergency board meeting arrived with a gray, heavy sky hanging low over downtown Chicago. Helena had summoned the executive directors and our primary institutional investors to the top-floor boardroom of the Vance Logistics headquarters. Her objective was clear: secure immediate board approval to liquidate 3 major distribution hubs at 50 cents on the dollar, a rushed sale designed to cover her illicit $250,000 loss before the fiscal quarter closed. I spent the preceding 48 hours working with a team of independent forensic accountants, a top-tier corporate litigation attorney, and the state prosecutor's financial crimes unit. We laid out the evidence with surgical precision. Every line of code, every microcode printer, yellow dot trace from the fraudulent will, every offshore wire transfer, and the raw toxicological lab data were bound into identical black leather dossiers. At precisely 10 o'clock, Helena stood at the head of the mahogany conference table. She wore a tailored black suit, her demeanor radiating effortless authority, as she projected a slide deck showing the proposed asset sales. Given the tragic passing of my husband Richard and the operational instability left in his wake, this restructuring is the only viable path forward to protect shareholder value, Helena announced, her voice smooth and practiced. I am asking the board for a unanimous vote to authorize the immediate transfer of property deeds to the offshore acquiring firm. Before you call for that vote, Helena, perhaps the board would like to review the real ledger, I said, stepping through the double glass doors at the rear of the boardroom. The room fell dead silent. Helena's face paled for a fraction of a second, but she quickly recovered, her expression shifting to one of cold contempt. She signaled to the security guard standing near the entrance. "Clara, you are trespassing on private corporate property," she said calmly, stepping around the podium. "I warned you at the hospital. Escort her out of the building immediately, or I will have her arrested." "These officers won't be touching me, Helena," I replied, holding up a certified court injunction issued 2 hours ago by the Cook County Chancery Division. "And neither will your private security detail." This order stays all corporate asset sales, freezes every corporate and personal account linked to your name, and reinstates me as Chief Operating Officer pending a full judicial inquiry. A ripple of panicked whispers swept through the board members. The lead director, a longtime associate of my father, stood up and took the dossier I handed him, opening it to the first page. "What is the meaning of this absurdity?" Helena snapped, her voice tightening as she took a step toward the lead director. "She is a grieving, unstable former employee making desperate, baseless allegations." "They are hardly baseless," I said, pointing to the main projection screen. I plugged my encrypted flash drive into the podium terminal, overriding her slide deck with the live verified data streams. On the screen right now is the complete forensic breakdown of the $250,000 you stole from our reserve capital 4 days before my father died. You funneled it through a series of shell companies into a fake cryptocurrency scam, completely wiping out our liquidity. Helena gasped, her eyes darting frantically across the screen as the transaction hashes, wire routing numbers, and offshore account names illuminated the room in sharp, undeniable clarity. "You forged my father's signature on a modified will printed 8 hours after his death," I continued, stepping closer to her, my voice echoing through the silent boardroom. "You poisoned him systematically with unregulated chemical compounds to accelerate his decline, all to seize absolute control before your $250,000 theft was exposed during the standard audit. That is a lie," Helena screamed, dropping her composure entirely as she lunged toward the podium to pull the flash drive. "You have no proof. You have nothing." The side door of the boardroom swung open. 2 special agents from the state attorney's office, accompanied by uniformed police officers, walked into the room. The lead investigator stepped forward, pulling a pair of steel handcuffs from his belt. "Helena Vance, you are under arrest for grand larceny, corporate fraud, forgery, and first-degree attempted murder," the lead agent declared, reading her rights as the handcuffs clicked tightly around her wrists. Helena stood frozen in the center of the boardroom as the cold reality of the steel cuffs sank into her skin. The smooth, untouchable composure she had cultivated for 3 years disintegrated in a matter of seconds. She looked wildly around the table, desperately searching the eyes of the board members for a single ally, but every head turned away in disgust. The lead director closed the black dossier with a heavy thud, shaking his head with quiet contempt as the officers escorted her toward the private executive elevators. The quiet that settled over the room after the elevator doors closed was heavy, but for the first time in months, the air felt clean. The board of directors held an emergency session on the spot, unanimously voting to restore my full authority as Chief Operating Officer and confirming my position as the rightful head of Vance Logistics. The fraudulent will was formally set aside by the court, allowing my father's true estate plan to take effect exactly as he had intended. In the weeks that followed, the full extent of Helena's operations was exposed in court. The forensic accountants recovered the majority of the diverted assets, tracing the remaining funds back through the shell companies before they could vanish into the offshore cryptocurrency network. The chemical analysis from my father's original medical samples provided irrefutable proof of long-term administration of controlled sedatives, cementing her conviction without any room for appeal. She was sentenced to 25 years in a federal penitentiary, without the possibility of early parole. Restoring the company was not an easy process. It took months of relentless work to rebuild the trust of our long-term shipping partners, rehire the veteran managers Helena had ousted, and stabilize our operational reserves. I moved my desk back into my father's old office, keeping his simple wooden desk and the vintage brass compass he always kept near his ledger as a reminder of the values that built this business. The old warehouse in Cicero was never sold. Instead, I had the structure fully renovated, transforming the damp storage bays into a modern training facility and community center for our drivers, mechanics, and logistics staff. On the wall inside the main lobby, right beside the entrance to the old mechanical vault, I mounted a simple bronze plaque dedicated to my father, honoring his dedication to fairness, integrity, and hard work. Standing by the window of the top-floor office on a clear autumn morning, watching our fleet of silver freight trucks pull out of the central hub, I finally felt the heavy knot in my chest dissolve. Helena had believed that power came from deception, manipulation, and greed. She thought she could erase 30 years of honest work with a forged signature and a stolen password. But she underestimated the strength of the foundation my father built, and she forgot that real leadership is not declared on a piece of paper. It is earned through truth and endurance. My victory was never about destroying her or matching her malice with cruelty. It was about standing up when everything was designed to knock me down, honoring my father's legacy, and reclaiming the truth that had been buried in the dark. As the sun broke through the clouds reflecting off the glass towers of the city, I knew that justice had finally been served, and my father could rest in peace. Thanks for watching. Like, comment, and subscribe to Betrayed, the Revenge channel. New video coming soon.